Welcome to Octagon 3 Election Observation Situation Reviews and Press Conference on Edo and Ondo States gubernatorial elections. Today is the 18th of November 2024. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the press, dear Nigerians, thank you for joining us today as we reflect on the milestones and challenges of the 2024 off-cycle gubernatorial elections and the closure of our Octagon 3 Situation Room at Ready to Lead Africa. Our commitment to transparency, accountability, and integrity in Nigeria's electoral processes remains unwavering. With the deployment of our citizen observers scattered across all LGAs in both the Edo State and Ondo State, Upload the Result platform enabled us to observe electoral activities in real time across both states. Today, reflect on both our successes and the ongoing challenges that continue to undermine the credibility of Nigeria's elections. Despite significant resources, numerous recommendations, and the collective efforts of stakeholders, persistent issues such as vote buying, security failures, and inadequate assets for persons with disability continue to mar our electoral process. And that's just to mention a few. Some of our observations include: one, vote buying and electoral manipulation. In multiple locations, including but not limited to Ondo East, Akure South, and Ovia Northeast in Edo, our observers reported widespread vote buying, with 30 agents distributing cash to voters in full view of security personnel. No interventions were made, compromising the integrity of the vote. Secondly, we have obstruction of election observation. Our observers faced significant obstructions across multiple polling units. In Ondo, particularly in Ondo East, Akure South, and Owo, observers were either denied access to polling units, outrightly denied access to polling units to observe the elections, in order to keep their phones aside, severely hindering their ability to observe the elections and document irregularities. Similar challenges occurred in Edo, especially in Eshan West, Uhumonde, and Ovia Southwest, where observers were prevented from fully observing the process, compromising the integrity of the electioneering process. Thirdly, we recorded security failures. Security personnel, though deployed to various locations, we had over 30,000 security personnel in both elections deployed to various locations in both states. However, they failed to address incidents of voter intimidation and violence. In areas like Owo and Ovia Southwest, reports of confrontations between party agents and voters went unaddressed, fostering an unsafe environment. The lack of response emboldened perpetrators and exacerbated tensions. Fourthly, we observed, and this is on a good note, early opening and start of polls, primarily at the just concluded Ondo elections. Through reports on our Follow the Result platform, we observed early opening of polls and early arrivals of INEC officials and materials across multiple polling units. As at 7:20 a.m., RTLA observers, that's Ready to Lead Africa observers, reported that INEC officials had arrived at over 52.6% of the polling units in Ondo State. Fifthly, we observed inaccessibility and poor accessibility for persons with disability. Many polling units lacked accessibility for PWDs, inadequate infrastructure, particularly in rural areas of Ondo and Edo, including Igweben and Owan East, prevented persons with disabilities from casting their votes, severely undermining, I'd like to add, the inclusivity of the election process. And finally, for the purpose of this press conference, some of our final observation is low voters turnout. In the just concluded governorship elections in Ondo State, with total registered voters of 2,053,061 voters, it is shocking that only 508,963, voters, and which makes up about 24.79% of the total registered voters, decided to come out and vote, and they decided the outcome of the elections. And also looking back at Edo, with registered voters of 2,629,025 voters, only 604,132 persons came out to vote, which represented just about 22.5% of the total registered voters. And these were the only figures that participated in the electioneering process.
Thank you for joining us once again. media. As part of our recommendations, right, as CSOs, there is need for stronger collaboration for a more effective campaign to educate voters on holding electoral system accountable, as we have seen series of vote buying and voter manipulations in these elections. We call for stronger collaboration between INEC, security agencies, and anti-graft agencies to ensure enforcement of penalties when found culpable. We also call on INEC for a continual improvement of BVAS to reduce the constant delays we see at polling units and ensure optimal functionality with real-time updates of electioneering process at this polling units. There should be unimpeded access for officially accredited INEC election observers to polling units and collation center to ensure transparency in our electoral system. Also, there should be swift and impartial response to election related violence and infractions by security agencies, as we have seen in some of the areas where we have violence in this recent election. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, as we close the Octagon 3 Situation Room, Ready to Lead Africa will continue its commitment to advocating for credible elections and improving Nigeria's electoral process. We want to thank our team, our observers, our stakeholders, all of our partners, including Nigerians, for their contribution to this work that we've done. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much to colleagues at Ready to Lead Africa. I really want to commend the efforts for even putting up the situation room. I think one of the things we have seen is young people taking the lead in all the election monitoring, election engagements across Nigeria, and I think keeping people informed is also very important and very vital in these times to ensure we're not just monitoring election, but also planning to hold our leaders, elected leaders that we elect into office accountable, not just getting us into office, but holding them accountable, helping people understand why they should hold them accountable and why they should be responsible. Two things we've also mentioned highlighted from the press conference. The first one talks about vote buying, which has been a recurring thing. I mean, it's quite disturbing to see that year in, year out, every election you see politically exposed politicians, political party members fly into state elections. Take, for instance, what we've seen in Edo, where most of the governors from APC had already gone into Edo states, also similar to Ondo states elections. The second thing, again, I've also observed within these elections in Edo as well as Osun, also talks about the low voters turnout. For me, these two things is for us to begin to hold INEC responsible, because the Electoral Act provisions are there for every Nigerian to understand. But one key thing we need to understand that we can't keep disenfranchising young people from voting. Look at the numbers we have, number of people that registered to vote, and look at the number of people that collected their PVCs, and look at the number of people that actually vote on election days, and the recurring trend across every state. INEC has to do better to ensure that their plan is not just conducting elections or go to the states, but ensuring that the people that are supposed to select their leaders, they have a strong strategy that makes sure people get into the room or get into the polling units and vote. The second thing I'm going to look at, also talk about critically, is around INEC's ability on contracting purposes. We've seen what the electoral budget, the INEC Independent National Electoral Commission's budget looks like across the states, across the nation, all elections. But at the end of the day, we only see analysis of how many people collected PVC, how many people voted, what policy they've set up. But we need our INEC to also account for the monies in which they spend. Because we are not just monitoring elections, we are also monitoring the expenses of the national government to ensure that every citizen in Nigeria is counted and they go out to the polling units to vote, because that's why we have the budget, to ensure these processes work around. Right. This means that we need to begin to ensure these processes work and also build trust for government institutions, because with low voters turnout, with manipulation of elections we've seen across these places, it's beginning to breach a distrust between the people and even the Electoral Commission across the states. So we want INEC to do well in their strategies as one of the recommendations to ensure they open their contracting process. This is to ensure Nigerians sees what they're doing. And also responsible INEC officials should be conducting elections so they can mitigate some of these challenges which we identified. Thank you very much.